Who said you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Hi, I'm Gail Rubenstein, the founder and CEO of Retail Resilient. We teach car dealers all over the country how to sell more cars and make more money using social media platforms. Like I said, who says you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Check us out at retailresilient.com or send us a message in the chat bar on the Auto Hub Show.
Hi, it's Barry here with White Glove Performance Group. Thanks for joining the show this morning. Always great content on here, and a big shout out to Ian and Jeff for all the hard work that they put into this show. Just wanted to say really proud of being a sponsor of this show. White Glove Performance Group, what do? We have a cloud-based dialing technology called Touchpoint. Touchpoint is used in dealerships all across North America. And the main reason for its popularity is because dealerships can now amp up their team to be calling 50 people an hour. They can leave a personalized voicemail, a custom email as follow-up, all with a click of a mouse. This really speeds up some of the jobs that happen in the dealership, such as cleaning up your recalls, cleaning up lost souls in service, running a private sale, trying to reach out to your database to buy inventory. Obviously, we know that's the way to source it in today's environment. So yeah, whitegloveperformancegroup.com. My direct is 587-899-6600. Love to have a chat with you about some of the things that we can do. But outside of that, I'm going to turn it back over to the host of the show, and hope everybody enjoys it.
Everyone, I'm John Latka from Automotive Business Solutions, where we help dealerships build more productive and proactive by-appointment sales cultures through our Performance Management Partnership Program. So, if you want to increase your sales volume by 2 to 3 sales per month per salesperson, call our toll-free number, 877-708-8484 for a free consultation.
So, obviously went through the video already, so now what we're going through is some few books. I wasn't sure what books to pick since it's the end of the month show, but Auto Brand, Building Successful Car Brands for the Future, The Future of the Automotive Industry by Irna Martinez, and The Arrival of the Electric Car by Chris Johnson. I did actually, and Ed Sobey, I did actually visit the new Lucid showroom over the weekend in Vancouver, so I'll have some thoughts on that. But let's get into it. Jeff, go ahead with your disclaimer.
Well, officially, the disclaimer, those of you that saw the video, we really need this disclaimer today.
Yes, you do.
Views and opinions of the show are just our guest speakers' guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Auto Hub Show or Ian Nethercott or Jeff Polo or any associated agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions made in this analysis are not reflective. Yes, I went a little bit longer this time, but that video had a lot of bleep words, so.
Thanks, Jeff. And it's the month-end show, so it's, I guess, the pre-Christmas month-end show for those folks who are doing the Cyber Monday today, I guess. And I do had some thoughts on a Black Friday kind of private sale. I think Jeff and I were talking about it a little bit earlier. I think it's Audi Queensway was having, and they were advertising us on LinkedIn. So I reached out to them and I said, okay, well, what does that mean? Since you have no inventory, what are you blowing out? And they said, well, we're taking pre-orders for leases. And I'm like, but how is there a sale when you have no inventory? So it's kind of an interesting conversation. But why don't we start a little bit with Lucid, since that's the new electric car maker out of, I think they're out of China or California or something to that effect. And basically they have a new showroom. The first one in Canada is actually in Vancouver. So I went to the showroom. It's at a mall downtown. And I went in there. You couldn't sit in the car. You couldn't touch the car. The car's a prototype that they made 2 years ago. They can't really tell you much about the car. You can't drive it. But you can buy the Lucid t-shirt and hat and coat and whatever. But it was kind of interesting because the cars start in Canada at around $100,000. And they go up to about almost $200,000 for the one that was in the showroom. But that one was a prototype. So that car was built almost 2 years ago and really isn't reflective of what you're actually going to get. So it was kind of interesting that they're employing 3 to 5 people really as PR people for a product that doesn't exist. So it was kind of interesting. But why don't you start, Jeff? What did you want to talk about today?
Well, we actually started in this conversation just before we went live, and about your poll that what are we going to invest in this year? And the number one so far response from on your poll is training and people, and the last one is facilities, new buildings. And it was very interesting. Your comment was that the only person that voted for a new building was an OEM person.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically, we all know that dealers have magically figured everything out in 2022, that before then they needed some help. But in 2022, as Troy was saying, everyone had a permagrin on at events saying, well, we figured it out. And this was also true in Digital Dealer. We don't need to buy anything because, we're just making tons of money and people are buying everything at exorbitant prices. So I put in a poll and I said, okay, as we get into 2022, most dealer groups are now meeting and saying, hey, like what are we going to do better in 2022 as markets more normalize? And the 4 options were new website and software, staff and training, new building, or nothing. We have it all figured out. So the new website and software was 13% so far. Post just launched, so I'll probably have more numbers for next week's show. Hey, Sandy. Staff and training, believe it or not, was 81% of the vote so far. So if you're in the staff and training side of the business, the dealers at scale want, they want to invest in staff and training. A new building, 6%. Surprisingly, the person who voted for that happens to work for an OEM. He thinks that's what you should invest in to do better.
And here's the funny part.
Nothing we are rocking, no votes, no one's admitting they know everything so far. But I'm sure by the end of the week, I'll have some people saying they know everything.
Well, so here's the thing to remember. In 6 months, let's revisit this. My opinion is in 6 months, what dealers are focusing on will be 1, a new building. And number 5, Sandy, what's number 5 going to be?
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, mute.
I know. I don't know. What are my choices? I mean, number one.
Well, the choices on the thing were new website and software, staff and training, new building, or nothing. We are rocking. But in your case, it would probably be something about compliance.
Well, let's always hope that diversity, equity, and inclusion is in there as well as HR. I don't know if it'll be number 5.
Have you done any polling on LinkedIn yet?
Actually, no, I haven't. That's a great idea.
I would highly recommend doing polling on LinkedIn for a couple reasons. Number one, the amount, because of the new algorithm on LinkedIn, the amount of views you get, depending on how controversial it is, are thousands. Number two, from a sales perspective, or if you're marketing a product or service, you actually can see who votes. So it may give you opportunities to talk to dealers or prospective clients about exactly what they voted on. So if they're voting on diversity or inclusion or rehiring or whatever, I mean, you are limited with how many. I think you can only do 4 or 5 choices. But you can definitely talk to those people and say, hey, like I noticed you voted on staff and training, or you voted on diversity and inclusion or compliance or rehire or whatever your voting is. Basically, you know how they vote, so it gives you a lot of visibility on LinkedIn. That's why you see so many lately. But also, it gives you potentially leads for whatever it is that you do. Like for example, staff and training. If I'm in that business, I'd be doing a poll today because 81% are saying that. So what that tells me is that that's definitely an angle if you're selling something to a dealership from a B2B point of view.
So back to the question though.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would also hope that dealers are looking at tools, retailing tools, right, to make a more streamlined process for their customers, right, making their I think it's Carrie Wise that says make your your showroom is an extension of your website, right? So anyway,
Well,
15% said website and software, so
okay.
there's a little bit.
and here's the funny part. And the reason that I mentioned that is, again, before we went live, we were chatting and we were talking. Troy was saying you got all these dealers. You can't hear me? Oh, you can. Good. By the way, how's the foot? Oh, no. Another cast?
No, I'm in a walking boot that I can't walk in.
I'll give it a couple of days.
Like, I'm not allowed to put, like, I can stand apparently and put weight on it, but I'm not allowed to walk. So I'm very sad about this.
Oh, and you were walking in your cast probably too, though.
No, I wasn't. I was being really good. It's just the one break was pretty far off.
We'll go on so you don't have to think about it. But it was because Troy said he was at a big conference up in Banff, Alberta, and all the dealers are running around with big smiles on their faces about how great they're doing. And, the comment really is, or perhaps the question is, are they going to take this forward? Or are they just going to say, look at me, look at how great I am? And then all of a sudden they got inventory and they've got staff and they've hired all these people and they're giving cars away. And now what do? That's the question. Anybody want to answer that? Or Troy?
Yeah, I was going to say, we were talking about that before. And first of all, I want to say that the idea that we were riffing off of before all came from Brian Benstock. And the question was, what should dealers be doing in the face of all this, new normal? And what he said was, you should be building your war chest and getting ready for the next disaster. And if you go back to, 2008 or every other time that there was a dip in the economy, living in Western Canada, when oil was $150 a barrel, there were guys selling cash trucks for 140 grand up to the guys in Fort McMurray, and these kids coming down and paying huge money or over leveraging themselves and throwing tons of options on these things. And 2-3 years later, when oil's $50 a barrel, next thing you know, you've got people going up and basically repoing these trucks and bringing them back and selling them again. So has anyone going to learn anything from this success? I'm not sure. I'd like to think that the dealers that say they're, investing in staffing would be investing in training and making their staff better. More likely what they're saying is, I was out so much money at the beginning of this pandemic, I'm going to use this to recoup my losses. And now, as far as staffing is concerned, I'll probably hire some people back. But when you think about it, that actually creates a worse situation for training, because now all the rehires that are coming back, a bunch of them are probably going to be new and maybe new to the business, and they're not going to have the training in the backup that they need. So the need to invest in training and building your team and making them better. I know I'm a tool salesman, but I got to say, like, the process piece and the training piece, you got to invest in that all day long.
Well, the interesting thing is too, and you brought up something that tweaked a thought in my mind, is how many of them are going to sit there and say, well, you know what, we're doing so well right now with the staff level we've got. We're going to keep them here because they're that good. They're selling a car over the phone in 25 minutes and it's gone. So we don't need more people. Do you think many of them are going to do this and then suddenly panic and start hiring a ton of green people?
I think most people are going to recognize that what's going on now isn't really sustainable, that they are going to need more people for the sake of the customer experience, if nothing else.
But and I understand what you're saying. And what Ian and I were talking about before Troy came on is I'm looking through the auction and there's all these new car dealers running their product on the wholesale auctions. There's a Toyota dealer auctioning a 2021 Tundra. Yet everybody's saying they can't get trucks. Of course, there's Chrysler stores all putting on Hellcats and TRXs and everything else. I don't know if anybody retails buying them, because in Canada they're selling them to the States, and why not?
Well, that's really it right now. So that, to carry on that truck analogy, there's a dealer, the largest volume Ford dealer in Western Canada has a guy who lives permanently in Alberta. This store is in BC. And they would get 6, 8, 10 trucks at a time, car carrier them down to the city where the store is. They would change the Canadian instrument clusters for US instrument clusters and sell them over the border, and they'd make money on the exchange rate. They'd make money in the market. There's less money to be made here, and you don't have to pay anyone commission to do it.
Yeah, or of course the related benefits and everything.
Well, there's cross border there out of Langley, BC. I mean, what he was doing, I think he's still doing it, but he has a lot in Seattle. So what he does is he buys the vehicles in the Canadian market, he ships them over the border. He has to he titles them immediately, but he can't sell them for 30 days. So what he was doing was having people come in and buy the car as it lands. And then they hold on to it for 30 days. And then as soon as they can release it, they give it to him. But now he's decided it's better to just have a retail lot. So I think what he's now doing is retailing them direct. So he's figured that out. But I know at the peak in 2007, he was doing $7 million a year. Something to that effect. Of
a nice 20% return on it too.
Yeah.
And there's a dealer group out east that every week posts on LinkedIn. There's 120 vehicles running in northern Michigan or Detroit Auto Auction from them.
Well, look at H. Gregoire. They're importing all the French Canadian vehicles into Florida.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
Not a bad move.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I mean, when you look at the amount of dealers in the Ontario Quebec market who also own dealerships in the Florida market, it's kind of interesting, especially as we see larger and larger acquisitions, both from Canadian dealer groups buying U.S. dealer groups in different areas, but also U.S. dealer groups now buying Canadian dealer groups. Olivia just buying FAF, but there's other moves in that area where you're seeing groups saying, okay, like Foundation, I believe we've had on the Sun. I mean, their market was basically to buy undervalued stores in less desirable markets, so in smaller markets, and scale that way. So that was kind of interesting. But from a point of view of 2022, and I know we've talked a little bit about chip shortages in the past and other things in the past, other than the sales side of the house, I mean, what are you seeing out there in the service side of the house, being that service and used cars are now suddenly more important? Does anyone want to comment?
I think from a fixed op standpoint, and I mean, I know we covered this a few shows back, but really what Jeff said about the customer experience, it's going to be about customer experience in fixed ops. And I know I was just in Winnipeg not long ago, and there's a brand new building got put up there, and they have 6 service advisor desks, and each desk is, spacious, can have 3 seats at it. There's 2 monitors above each one showing the estimate, the other one showing specials or menus or whatever. And they're going through almost an F&I process every time they check a vehicle in. And they are throwing more bodies at it because, the service market still is doing quite well. But I think that when a customer comes in, they're going to actually get, here's your coffee, here's your water, have a seat, very similar to an F&I. Here's your menu. We're going to do this service today, which is covered under your plan, but we recommend doing this. And, our company is putting algorithms and machine learning into the software to say, okay, all over North America, at a certain number of kilometers or miles on a truck, this part starts to show as a fail. So they'll start pre-recommending some of these parts. So I think you're going to start to see a little bit more of that in fixed ops, all customer experience, not so much the driving range and the spa and all that stuff, but I think more into the selling more stuff. And
well, and it's funny because they did respond to Ian's poll that people in training, and I would like to see more actual training in the service drive, because I think that's where a lot of it falls apart. A lot people will come in, and the good service advisors do what you said. They'll sit them down. They greet the customer the moment they drive in. And there's a place for them to sit down, and they get to see it, and they go through a proper menu, because that's a big deal. That's how the customer experience goes up, and that's how more money is made in service. And I agree with you completely. As as things progress to more of a digital experience in the sales side, they're still going to have to service their cars.
Yeah, when you look at whether it be Xtime or Dealer FX systems, or even GoMoto or Storm, for example. Storm, I think, is the Canadian version, but GoMoto, I think, is owned by Reynolds now. But essentially, that kiosk that you'd see in an airport or at a McDonald's, that type of kiosk experience is becoming part of the process, really to make sure that menu is presented every time. When I worked for Dealer FX, and I've also had experience with Xtime, essentially, it was the same thing. It was like getting a service writer to present a menu based on factory recommendations every time and say, okay, well, the manufacturer is recommending these things based on the mileage in your vehicle. But more importantly, as customers embrace that online digital appointment setting experience, even, you have consistency where you show up for service, they actually know you're supposed to be there. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a service department and they don't even know you're supposed to be there. It's like, well, I did book an appointment. Like,
I think it's even simpler than that, Ian. I went in, my wife used to own a Kia a while back, and it was time for the monthly service, or the timely service every 6 months. So I brought it in for its lube oil filter and dropped the keys off 15 minutes before my time, because I'm punctual like that. And I thought, well, I'm in this business, I want to see how the store operates. So I just opened my laptop and sat in the lounge. And I parked my car right on the other side of the glass, dropped my keys inside. Well, the car didn't move for 45 minutes. And at 45 minutes, I just got up, went to the service advisor and said, hey, I'm not sure, maybe I got missed, but my car is still sitting out here. I'm just here for a lube oil filter and an inspection. And they said, okay, yeah, well, we're going to get to it right away. Well, maybe 120 seconds later, some guy came out and drove it around the back. So I said, while that guy was doing that, I said, well, I think the wiper blades need replacing. Do you guys have any wiper blade specials? And I wrote an article on LinkedIn like 10 years ago about wiper blades and the gross profit margin on wiper blades. And she said, yeah, it's going to be $80 to replace your 2 wiper blades. I'm like, well, if you could do a little better than that, I might get them done today. Otherwise, you're 2 blocks from a Costco, so I'll let you choose. And she goes, no, it's going to be $80. I said, well, then I'll decline. Thank you. Well, about 18 minutes later, my lube oil filter and full inspection was completed magically, and my vehicle was brought back around. And when I was given the sort of customer sign-off inspection piece of the RO, everything said, cabin air filter, rear seal, all that stuff, all said customer declined. Now, this place was a ghost town. I was sitting there the whole time. They had tons of opportunity to sell me something. I asked them to sell me something. I told them what they needed to do to win the sale, and nothing happened. In fact, I walked out paying nothing because that was all part of my prepaid service. So there needs to be some training out there for sure.
Well, I'll give you an example of 2 U.S. stores. One of them in Los Angeles, California, happened to be a Chrysler store that I did work at. And the other one is a Toyota store that I think I've mentioned before in Beaverton, Oregon. So this Toyota store in Beaverton, Oregon has 60 service bays. They have a car wash that's about twice the size of the one that you'd see at your average gas station. They have, I think, 18 service writers. Plus, they have express oil change lube teams. So they've got 2 lube teams that just do express oil change. They were servicing cars there that were bought there in the 80s. They were still being serviced at the dealer. And they're outside of Portland, so it's not a big dealership. But what was amazing about that dealership in my mind was just how tight the process was from the customer arrival to the teams working on the car, to the point where the different teams, they had like a red team and a blue team and a yellow team in the service. Those teams worked on cars and only on certain cars. But what was consistent about them was that they were always going through that with the customer. All the Dealer Effects tool did was basically make them better at something they were already better at. Going through the recommended service, making sure that those things are done. And then I'll give you an example of a dealership in Los Angeles. So I was there doing some training for FCA, and they didn't sell tires there very often. And we had a tool in the tool to sell tires. So I was talking to one of the service writers. He goes, oh yeah, we don't inventory tires. I go, what? He goes, oh no, we don't have any in stock. I said, so you have this thing like in the drive that's got tires on it. There's like, they're bolted to it. There's like 3 of them or something, right? I said, so you just have those 3 tires? He goes, yeah, I don't know. So I went over and I talked to the parts manager. I said, out of curiosity, like, do you have 3 other tires that match the ones bolted, or do you just have that 1 tire? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, can you look it up for me? So they had 1 tire. They had like, I think 2 displays. Each one had 3 tires on it. So they had 6 tires in stock in downtown Los Angeles. And I said, okay, so we're talking to the service writer, and he's unable to sell tires because you don't have them. How quickly could you get tires? Well, we could get them in, 20 to 30 minutes and this and that. I said, okay, so is there a reason you don't stock any? Well, we can get them. So then I had a discussion a couple days later with the service director for the group, which is a large group. And he said, well, what tires should we stock? I said, well, maybe the ones that came with the vehicles you service. That might be a good starting point. So what surprised me about that, and it wasn't a Canadian example, obviously it was a big US dealer that happened to be in downtown Los Angeles, was you could see there was a huge opportunity there, but it was really an opportunity that was solved by basically listening to the staff in the drive who talk to customers who can't sell tires, not because they don't want to, but because they don't have any. And I was shocked, because I was like, wow. And then I'll give you one more example, which happens to be of an Audi store in the local market. Because one of the biggest challenges on the service side of the house is inventory. So surprisingly, inventory that people ordered that never picked up, or just inventory, in some cases, millions of dollars of inventory that just sits there, that they ordered, or people didn't want, or they didn't call them, or whatever. So this Audi store has a machine that probably costs, I would say probably a couple $100,000. But what the machine does is when you ask it for a part, it distributes that part based on what you've asked for automatically, and it automatically distributes the oldest part in inventory for you. So it not only manages your inventory, it also eliminates wasted time finding it. So that's another area where I think parts departments really can do well, is just calling the customers maybe at the beginning of a month or at the beginning of a season that ordered parts that maybe didn't pick them up. Like, hey, I have your part, and you probably paid for it, in some cases already paid for it, but let's book you in. Let's get the part on the car, as opposed to ordering the part.
Hence goes the comment about training, because it is very funny. Troy's experience, it's not uncommon. Customer decline because somebody didn't walk out. And by Ian, your example, the parts manager couldn't care less either. And let me rephrase that. The parts manager hasn't been trained to care.
Well, I'll use another example. Dealership I worked with in the Winnipeg market, they had this oil change for life program. And I know everyone's probably heard about these programs. Free oil change for life kind of thing. So I was training a couple service writers. One of them was quite good at she's been at it a long time. She was very good at upselling customers. The other one was not very good at doing anything but selling the oil change. And I said, well, the oil change doesn't cost any money, man. So they got to pay you somehow. So you're selling the thing that's free. That's not a good long-term strategy for you. But the other thing that was really interesting when I was talking to when I worked for Nissan, was another oil change for life program. I was asking the service director, I said, okay, so how many of the people that get that oil change for life do anything other than oil change? Because they always want, all the service done there and all that stuff. He says they had people there that had bought cars years and years ago, or in some cases even cars that were then sold to somebody else, where people were still coming in for this oil change for free. So I question the oil change for life program, but also I question and say, okay, you need to train people how to identify what needs to be done on that vehicle, but more importantly, share it with the customer. The customer doesn't know unless you tell them. And that's what I said to him. I said, you might look at it as a service writer as I'm upselling someone, or I'm making them pay more money, but really you're doing that, but you're also helping that customer avoid problems with the car over time. And I'll use the example of myself recently. I got a service done on my car, and I had 3 different options to service it. There's a local used car place that specializes in those cars, and 2 dealers in my local market that specialize in the car. The price range for that service ranged, there was about a $1,500 spread on the same service. from three different, like the 2 different franchise dealers had different prices, and the third party had a different price. It was about a $1,500 spread in cost.
So Troy, I'm going to ask you a question.
That was crazy.
So Ian touched on it here, and then you mentioned it earlier. It sounds like you're on an oil change for life or a service contract with an oil change on, or were on your wife's old car. And is it correct in assuming, and hopefully I know the answer, that a lot of service writers, if somebody has that prepaid oil change, whatever it is, that they're just not even going to bother talking to them about selling something? Their mind is closed. Do you think so, Troy?
You know what? I'm not so sure. And why I say that is, if you think about, you know, some of the tools that Ian sold in the past and I saw was all around booking appointments in the drive. Jeff, you ran a couple dealerships. You know how this is going to go. I'm going to book my car in for 1:45 p.m. But what time's that car showing up? 7:45 a.m. My keys are going in a drop box. It's not even so much that there's an opportunity or is the person wanting to talk to them. It's largely, I would say, the bulk of the time, it's they didn't have the opportunity to do it face to face. So if there were tools that allow people to do some of that stuff in advance online comfortably and the experience was better, then they might. If that was part of the onboarding process, we talked about that at Harley, where you can say, you know, here's some stuff you're going to get done, but here's some stuff you should get done, and talk about that at delivery. I think you could get a little bit more of that. But, you know, to go back to the training piece, I think a lot of the things around this whole experience can be automated, whether it's automating the parts picking, automating the appointment booking, automating the other stuff. And then where Sandy's training and expertise would come in is the part that's not automated, and you're focusing on the customer experience. That's when you get the best people and the right people in there in front of the customer and make them, you know, part of the experience and the exposure. So you have the diverse and inclusive staff that are going to make people feel comfortable regardless of their walk of life, and grow that business. So it's like the Beaverton example as opposed to the other ones. I mean, you can automate a lot of the stuff that goes on in a dealership. I did not need a human being to tell me that I declined everything and that here's my keys. That was really unnecessary. That person didn't earn any money that day. But the customer experiences that are special, that bring people back, like the Beaverton's dealership, like that's really where the money and time needs to be invested.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at recommended, and this is the thing that I always stuck on with Dealer FX, when you say factory recommended service versus I'm selling you this, that made a huge difference by just saying that. Like, based on the VIN number in your vehicle and the mileage in your vehicle and the market you live in, this is what the factory recommends. Most people are going to go with that. The challenge, I think, rightly or wrongly, and Sandy can probably speak to this, I found this more common with women than men, but probably in both genders, was that there was just a distrust of that service writer saying they're selling me stuff that I really don't need for my vehicle. I mean, and I've had this happen to me sometimes, an attempt to sell me stuff, but like, you know, fuel injection cleaning or whatever it might be. But, you know, there are things that you need to do on a vehicle on a regular basis to make sure that vehicle continues to operate at an optimum. If you explain that to the customer and go, okay, based on the mileage and based on the vehicle and based on the, you know, the market you live in, this is what needs to be done. Most people are going to say that's fine, right? But if you are selling other things, which dealers do, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you can explain that, there is an opportunity to sell additional stuff. But I think in a lot of cases that service writers doesn't necessarily look at it the same way as a car salesperson or an F&I person would, but those same processes work. That same menu selling piece works. That same options works. You know, it's just missing those steps. Like if someone at Burger King can upsell people into a larger Happy Meal, I'm sure somebody working as a service writer can do the same thing by just using the same word tracks.
Well, let me stop you there. The word track is the problem. And the reason why we're in the situation we're in with a lot of these things is, think about how how back in the 80s and 90s tires got sold, or brakes. Well, you have to replace these brakes, or I'm not letting this car go off the lot, because you're going to get into a car accident the second you go over the curb. Or if you don't get that injector cleaner, your car is going to catch on fire, and your wife and kids and dog are going to burn in a fiery ball. That's the way it used to get sold, was all by fear. And there's a difference between scaring people into something, selling them something, and explaining why they should do something. And if you say, you know what, Ian, you just made a $50,000 investment in your vehicle at this mileage, because it's a used vehicle, pre-owned, the injector service needs to be done, and here's why: because deposits show up in your engine, and over time, that's going to become a problem if you want to keep this car for 200,000 kilometers. That's a lot different than if you drive off the lot today, that engine's going to fall out and it's going to cost you 40 grand.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, that's why some of the dealers, believe it or not, had a low-tech solution for this. And you see it sometimes now from an OEM point of view, where they had these cabinets in the service drive, and it would have like new part, old part, and examples. But what I'm seeing a lot more today, and this was a number of years ago, but what I'm seeing a lot more today is actually little things at the service desk where it shows the different, like oil over time, or brakes over time, or air filters over time, so you can actually use this as an example. But the most powerful thing that I saw being done was basically a technician taking a photo of the problem and getting an approval from the customer. Like, I'm walking around your car, I notice here's the brakes, here's where the problem is, I'm sending you a picture of it so that you know what it is, this is what the cost is, totally up to you, but this is what we're seeing on your car, versus your brakes are done, you need to replace them, or the discs need to be remachined, or whatever that might be, right? It's really a question of showing it to the customer and saying, okay, here's the worn brake pad that I took off your car. Oh. Here's what the disc looks like. This is why you need to resurface it, right? Versus you must do this.
Well, video is even better than photo. Yeah. But I remember when I was a kid, my dad said, when you take your car in, ask to get the old parts back, right? Well, they could just as easily go into the garbage and get parts that look like it. I wouldn't know the difference. I'm not a mechanic, or I would have fixed it myself. Yeah. It's just like going to Mr. Lube, and the guy comes up and shows you how crappy your fluid was. Well, they just dunked it in the old fluid down in the basement from someone else's car. There's right. No way that you can tell that. So the trust level from people is so low that dealers need to rebuild that back up. And it's really just from years and years and years. And if we're going to tie this all back into a nice little bow, it's when everyone was successful, they did what they did. They didn't care about the customer experience. And the damage to the entire industry's reputation is such now that nobody trusts it. People are starting to come back. Cars are way more complicated. They have to trust dealers a little bit more than they used to. Shade tree mechanics are becoming harder and harder to do with all the computers and specialized tools and parts that they need. But really, it's all about that trust piece. And if you can build the trust and experience, then people will get there. And I think, tools like the videos and photos and improving the customer experience that way will build that trust slowly over time.
But here's the funny thing. You mentioned the drive-in lube places. And this is where training, process, and rules come into play. Your drive-in lube place, $29.95 oil change, includes your oil and filter, does not include taxes. Yet the last time I checked, the average bill at a drive-in oil change place was about $115. And the person that deals with you is not a certified service advisor from Ford, GM, whatever. They're not they haven't gone through, Grant Cardone or the Grant Cardone's fixed ops guys training or anything like that. It's somebody that came, it's their first job in the country. Their English isn't very good. I hate to say it because, a lot of our locals won't take those jobs. And they come to you and they say, would you like oil? Would you like good oil? Would you like super good oil? Oh, and by the way, we took a look at your belt. We took a look at your wipers. We took a look at this. And they upsell about $50 to $60 per RO. And, Sandy, I'll ask you this. I mean, obviously you're the HR person, but you're moving into diversity, etc. Why is it these people can do this, and a smarty pants who's been here or grown up here or whatever there can't? You guys get, well, we both get lots of new immigrants. Why is that? Did I miss you?
No. This conversation is really interesting, and I'm sitting here listening, and I don't believe that there's a panacea answer. There's not just like a pat answer. I love.
By the way, the Auto Hub show does not recognize big words. No, just kidding.
So I love what Troy was talking about, right? And when Troy was kind of saying, forget about the word tracks, because we started out talking about trust, right? In this part of the conversation. And I feel like those word tracks, right, is part of what has led to distrust instead of relationship building, right? And solving the problems of our employees as well as our customers, right? Like you've all heard me talk about, I really believe that we need to flip the lens on how we look at employees and look at them as our internal customers. And just organically, if we really do that, that is going to translate to better customer service, right? And the customer experience. So I think, it's real possible. It would be like a study. You ask, Jeff, you're asking why can our immigrants in particular, I guess is the demographic that you're talking about. Why are they able to upsell when in the dealership world that isn't happening? And maybe, I don't know, it would have to take a study. Maybe culturally they are more relationship based. Maybe they're not so focused on, I don't know, but it's my belief that if I'm focused on the dollar first instead of people first, and solving the problems of the people, and also when we're talking about diversity, we're talking, I think it's really important that it's not just who's working in your dealership, but who are your potential customers, right? So I think it's really important that dealers do the research, right? Look at their own demographic, look at the demographics, and there's 2 websites. Well, in the US, I don't know what there is in Canada, but there's 2 websites. There's the census.gov, which gives a part of the story. And there's another website, I need to look it up. It's like USA something. It's run by Deloitte, and it gives it really breaks it down, and you can look it up to the zip code where you're in,
You can also look up usafacts.org, which is a nonprofit just about demographic information in the U.S. And Canada Stats Can would be your probably your go-to source, which is based on demographic data.
Right. So it's out there. The information is out there. Only do we look at it to see, or do we just, is there just a, I put in the chat, the good is the enemy of the best. That is one of my favorite sayings, right? And it has been one of my favorite sayings for a long time, or close to 30 years. I try and apply that in my life, and remember, just because I'm doing good, and all dealers are doing great right now, right? I think that can have a tendency to let us sometimes be like, okay.
Complacency.
Yeah.
It's complacent because we're doing okay, right? Like everybody's making money. I've heard dealers in the recent months talking about how do we keep our people on process, particularly new people to the industry who are coming into the industry in this last year, making a shit ton of money, hardly doing anything, right? Like not having to follow the organizational sales process, or just because the customers are paying way over invoice because they, for cars, they're turning people down because they've got another person who's waiting to buy this car, so they don't need this customer. So there's a loss there. And I think it all comes back to relationships, right? And just throw out like that, kind of like Troy said, forget about the scripts, worry about your people and your customers.
The other thing I think, and this is something that I've done at scale at dealerships back when I set up call centers, is, get your service writers or your call center together in a room on a Monday morning or at lunch or whatever, and call some of these third parties and see what their process is. I mean, the biggest thing that I learned from doing that years ago was there's, in some cases, people weren't selling because they thought their pricing was too expensive, to Troy's point. But in a lot of cases, when you look at whether it be Walmart or Jiffy Lube, or you pick your third party, all they're doing is servicing cars. So they actually need to make more money per customer than your average car dealership. And in a lot of cases, they're not even price competitive. I mean, I used to, the funniest one I think I remember was calling a Walmart location, and they were saying, well, we don't sell that oil in the service drive, but we do sell it in the store. Yeah. And they were like basically having you come in and buy stuff in one part of the house and come back to the other part of the house and all this stuff. And I was like, so you rent the hoist? Do I do that work myself? Or how does that work, right? But the funniest one, I think, was a Jiffy Lube, I think, where they said they could make any oil you needed in the drive for your car. So it's eye-opening, but more importantly, it's really about showing that employee that there's a reason for our process, whether it be GM Good Ranch Service or Toyota Certified or whatever. There's a reason why that customer who bought a Toyota or bought a Honda or bought whatever is coming to the dealership, but you need to go through those steps because it's important. Like that person, they're not trusting you just because you happen to work at a dealership.
Yeah. I want to clarify something Sandy mentioned. I think there's still a need for a talk track. I just think the old talk tracks are garbage, and the ones that worked 20 years ago don't work today. But I will say this, and this sort of leads into John's lane, is, when times are tough, everyone panics and hires consultants and trainers to try to get them up to speed. And they get a process, they get a talk track that works, it fits in their culture, it's good. But then the second that things get good, to Sandy's point, good is the enemy of great, then they just take their foot off the gas a little bit. And then next thing you know, it's back down, and then the good at times end and they're panicking again and they're wondering why John's training didn't work last time. It's not that. It's that if you can stay consistent, create that process that works, whether you steal the best from Jiffy Lube, the best from Walmart, the best from your OEM, and you make it the best you have, when times are good, you don't change it. You keep consistent, because eventually it'll start to decline or change, or there'll be a market shift or something will happen. You can't get tires, you can't get cars. You need to have that process in place already and drilled in and ingrained. So I think there is a place for training, and I think if those 85% of dealers that said they're going to do it, we're going to be in a better place.
I have just taken something from put together what's been said between yourself, Troy, and Sandy and Ian. The thing about, in my opinion, about these quickie lube places is their people know that they're working in a position that is to their capability. They have bought in to the process. So they've been told, look, you don't know what you're doing. So if you listen to me, you're going to do this, and we're going to pay you your $1.50 to upgrade to the fancy oil or whatever it is. And they go, okay. In dealerships, service writers go, do you know who I am? I hate to say it. That's one of my favorite lines. Do you know who I am? I've been doing this for 12 years. I can do this. I get an average of 0.2 hours per RO upsell. I'm really good. And they won't sell stuff that they don't make money on because they haven't bought in.
I had the opportunity, as I said, to work at an Audi store. Well, Audi stores have something called Audi Care. And we worked with, a challenging service writer at this store who really didn't want to talk to anyone who didn't have Audi Care, because he had to explain the pricing and justify it to that customer who didn't get it for free. And I was like, well, what percentage of your customers have Audi care? He says 80%. I said, so you'd rather deal with the 80% easy than the 20% difficult? He says, yeah, because for the 20% I have to justify our hourly rate, and the car breaks a lot, it's expensive to fix. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, but you kind of signed up for all the customers, not just the ones where basically you just have them sign here and it gets paid for them. So it was kind of interesting because when I worked for Nissan, prepaid maintenance was something that we had trouble getting dealers to sell. Prepaid maintenance to me is a great thing for the customer and for the dealer, but it doesn't mean you can ignore those people that don't have it. So I think it's really best practices. You got to train people on those. You've really got to get them on the right process. And more importantly, you got to show them the why. I mean, part of the reason I had dealers call third parties was to break down some of their preconceived notions, which were that we were too expensive. That's why people are going to Jiffy Lube. People are going to Jiffy Lube because they've been mistreated in the past, more than likely, or for convenience. It probably has very little to do with price.
I think a lot of dealers, especially dealers, and maybe fixed ops managers who've been in the business for 30, 40 years, why would they ever go to a Jiffy Lube on their own? They never would, because they have a service bay right there that's going to do all the work for them. So unless they're doing what you said, Ian, which is go and experience it themselves and learn, they're never going to take the best of that, because they have assumptions, but unless they're testing it, what they should do is take a couple of the vehicles they get in on trade and have all their service writers and all of their service people go do a Jiffy Lube experience with that vehicle and take the best of that and learn from it. But they won't.
You know, I had a service manager that
I had a service manager do this with one of their cars. He went to a Jiffy Lube and he said, I'm just going to agree to whatever they sell me. And it was something like 3 times what it would have costed his dealership to do the same work. So he did that. He did exactly that. The other piece that I learned specifically from a guy who was doing tire training in Toronto, which was really interesting, he happened to also own a number of third-party lube locations in the greater Toronto area. So he talked to me afterwards because he wanted to know how to increase his retention. And I happened to be doing some work at General Motors store, and they were trying to get the retention number up to 40% was the OEM mandate. He was at 70% retention for his location. So I said, okay, well, how do you do that? He goes, you sell everybody tires. He says, tires are the biggest retention tool of any service department, even if you don't make any money. He says, those people who come in and don't buy your tires from you and buy it somewhere else, they're probably not going to come back because they get embarrassed that they didn't buy it from you. And I thought that was really interesting. So that was another thing that was kind of interesting, was that he was being hired by OEMs to come into dealerships and teach them tires because they didn't know how to sell tires, which I thought was
you know what the uptake is on customers offered tires? Percentage?
No.
Something like 80% of people that have been offered tires in the service department buy tires.
Yeah.
They buy from the first person that mentioned it.
Yeah.
It's low-hanging fruit. And then, of course, once you do the tires, it's while the car's sitting there for 2.5 hours. By the way, we would like to do a power steering flush. Do you think?
I think
maybe.
I think that car is going to sit there for 3.5 hours because the dealership you went to, Jeff, doesn't stock tires.
Well, you know what? It's funny. It depends where you are. If you're in the snow belt in the US, Southern Ontario and Quebec in Canada, they all have tires. They have gobs of tires. Other than that, You know how many car dealers here? For those of you that don't know Vancouver, there's a big GM group here that's got 3 stores, and everybody just thinks he's got dirty pictures on the former president of GM or the chairman because he gets everything he's given to him. And he's one of the biggest tire distributors in the province. And what a lot of dealers do is they do the customer, they open up the website and they call him, and his truck's there in an hour with a set of tires. So they don't have to even stock them. And he gets his 1 or 2% markup. So
tires are huge. I mean, they're a huge business, but more importantly, what was surprising to me as I saw this tire training was the fact that your average service writer couldn't even tell the difference between this tire and that tire. So just tire training, you just have to know a little bit more than that customer. The customer wants expertise. They don't know, right?
Yeah. But we're coming up. We're at the end of the hour. Thank you all for joining us. We quite like our Ian and Jeff show ones because it's a hodgepodge of great stuff, and it goes wherever it goes. And I have to say from myself, it's fun. And Sandy, we're glad to hear you're up and are getting there around, and looking forward to seeing you dancing. And we're going to see you again in a couple of weeks on the show, or a week. I'm not sure which one. And Troy and John, thank you for being there almost every time. And
thanks, Brandy.
And Brandy, lovely to see you. I like your logo. It's outstanding. Ian, I'll leave you to close it, and thank you all so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the poll numbers and you look at the fact that there's still going to be growth in 2022, I think at auto dealers, even though I've heard different points of view. I mean, don't forget to invest some of that additional revenue that you have in the future of your staff and your business, but more importantly, in retaining your customers. There's going to be more entrants into the automotive market, and those companies are going to be after the same customers. I mean, there's a finite amount of $150,000 electric car customers, I'm sure, but they're going after the same customers. These showrooms are not ghost towns. So you need to pay attention to the customers you have at your dealership and treat them properly. It's pretty straightforward. That's it for me. Anyone else with some thoughts? Nope.
Arrivederci. Stay safe, everybody, and enjoy the sun, enjoy the rain, enjoying the storm, and we're going to enjoy whatever we got. All the best.